And I remember speaking at one of these sustainability conferences a couple of years back, and there was a big window, and when we looked outside, there were 1,500 cars. There were 1,500 people and there were 1,500 cars. They live the best of Mauritian lives. And all of them, barring none, said, we want to stay abroad. We will go out to study and we will stay there. And I'm worried about this trend. I thought I can't do any further right now because it was dark, my torch had run out. So I just decided to sleep. And that's a very dangerous thing on the mountain.
By yourself?
By myself, on the sand.
Hi everyone, I've got a small favor to ask. I know that many of you have been watching these conversations over the past couple of years with people who inspire. It would mean a lot to us and it would help us continue to have these conversations if you would just subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Mehul, welcome.
Thank you so much, Johan. Thank you for having me here.
It's a real pleasure. You were recommended to me by a few people, so I'm very excited about this conversation. Lately, over the past couple of episodes, one of the things that I've been focusing on and drives my first question is I'm always fascinated by how childhood influences shapes the person, who they become after, their character, their values, one way or another. Sometimes you have experiences in your childhood that you vow never to repeat again, and sometimes it's the other way around. So that was going to be my first question to you. How has your childhood influences affected how you are as an individual today?
Right. So before I get into that, so my journey till now has been through a lot of countries. I've been privileged enough to have lived and worked in many countries. So I started my life in India, the first 7 years in India, the next 4 in Tanzania, the next 7 in India again. Then I spent the next 7 years in the United States, then 5 in Denmark, then in Kenya, UK, Kenya, and now Mauritius. So Mauritius, 6 years. So if I go back into my childhood, some of the earliest memories that I have are of growing up in India in a very normal childhood, very, very different from what it is today. India was a very different country then. It wasn't as confident as it is today. It was not as abundant as it is today. There was literally shortage of everything that you could ask for. Having grown up over there, I remember very clearly one of my early childhood memories is to open a book, and it was an atlas. And I started looking at the world. And I started looking at all the 200 countries that existed in this world. And I just wished someday I get a chance to travel, and that I have. But I think if I look at my childhood, there are certain moments that have been more instrumental. Those are those inflection points that impacted me the most. Okay. And I want to talk about 2 of them.
Okay.
The first one was when I was 10. So we just shifted 2 years back from India to Tanzania. Very different life, from complete madness, a lot of people all over the place, to a very small town called Arusha. And that was on the foothills of a mountain called Mount Meru. I looked at this mountain every day for 2 years. And then one fine day, I don't know what happened, I thought I wanted to climb the mountain.
Okay. Was it a big mountain?
It was a big mountain.
Okay.
It's the 5th highest mountain in Africa.
Oh wow!
It's 4,500
okay,
meters.
So it's not for the faint-hearted.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And I wasn't fit at that point. I was not athletic. I was a bit heavy. I don't think there was any good reason for me to try it because I wasn't that adventurous anyway. But I don't know what happened, and I said I wanted to do it. And the school was organizing a trip for people who were 3 years elder to me. And I spoke to my parents and I said I want to do it. They took it more seriously than I did, and they enrolled me for it.
Okay.
And one of the first things that happened is when I decided to sign up for that, the person who was in charge of that expedition at school, he told me, if you must climb, you must prepare. And for the next 3 to 4 months, I prepared. And then finally, when I started climbing, I was not sure if I was going to make it. I was the youngest of the full lot.
So how old were you then?
Just over 10.
Wow, that's
just
very
over
young.
10. And over the next 36 hours, I made it to the top. And that was very instrumental, and I came back and it was great. But that was the first time when I wanted something which I did not deserve, which was way beyond whatever I could imagine. And that just gave me a lot of confidence to aim for things that I felt were completely out of reach. Until today, I look back at that Mount Meru moment and I say, thank God it happened. Thank God I don't know why I thought about it. And I'm glad my parents supported me. I'm glad the teachers supported it. Because at every stage there could have been a no, but there wasn't. So I think that was one of the two big moments that influenced me.
If I may
Sure.
just ask on that first moment, was there, because obviously it's a very, very high climb, I'm sure you had to deal with lack of oxygen and all the issues that you hear about very high climbs. Was there a moment during your climb where you felt like giving up, or not, that never occurred to you?
Honestly, it did. It occurred a few times because the final summit happens in the night. So I remember climbing in the middle of the night. It was really cold. The Mount Meru is very, very dusty and sandy.
Right.
So as you're climbing, you keep on coming down. It's not easy. And a lot of times I saw a lot of flights above me and I thought everybody else is way ahead of me. But I kept climbing. One, because I was alone and I didn't see anybody around me, so I was just scared.
Yeah.
And at some point I reached a wall and I didn't see many people around me. And I thought I can't do any further right now because it was dark. My torch had run out. So I just decided to sleep. And that's a very dangerous thing on the mountain.
By yourself?
By myself, on the sand. And fortunately, it was very close to the daylight. So within an hour, the daylight happened. And then I realized that I was literally at the top.
Where were the others?
There were a few behind me. There were a few above me, but they kind of managed to climb up the final rock.
Right.
So I was about 100 meters away from the top, and I made my final summit. So yeah, there were moments. And when I slept, I didn't know where I was. So it could have been giving up. But luckily, when I got up in the morning, I was 100 meters from the top. And it was
That's
nice to have
amazing.
made it to the top.
Were you scared? Because I'm thinking about my youngest, and he's almost 10. I can't even imagine it.
I think it's a trip worth doing. So when my daughters turned 10 and 12, we actually climbed Mount Kenya, which is another taller mountain than Mount Meru, and I think that was one of the best experiences. I was scared. I was probably more scared to fail than I was scared of getting injured or anything else, which is a strange one. So it mattered to me if I made it to the top or not. So yeah, I was scared about that. But I think after that particular incident or after that particular event, the life was much more different. I think I was a lot more confident. I was trying many more new things. And then I went back to India after that climb to finish my studies, spent the next 5 years in India. After my high school, I got into a medical school. And I wanted to do something else. But back then in India, if you got a good school, if you got a good scholarship, you took it. You could either become a doctor or you could become an engineer. So I started doing medical studies when I was 17.
Well, that's quite young.
Yes, and at that point, it wasn't very abnormal to finish at 17. I think in general, the studies have added a year to them, but it was quite common at that point in time to finish between 17 and 18. So I was just short of 17 when I finished my high school, joined a medical school just after 17. And as I
That was in the US, right?
In India still.
In India still.
In India still. And I really enjoyed doing medicine. My mother's a doctor, but all the people that I met back then who were doctors did not inspire the kind of excitement that I should have had. It was in a small town in India. So I said that I don't want to study for 10 years and then become something that I don't want to be. But that was a thought that kept on coming in my mind. And just before my first year final exams, I opened up a newspaper. There was a very small advert which basically said that we're looking for people who've just finished high school. We will get you to sail around the world. We will pay you a bit. We will help you study. And if you're interested, please join us. And the company's name was Chevron. I did not know Chevron because they did not exist in India, but internet was new at that point in time. Internet was barely 3 months old. So I went online. I looked at what Chevron was, and it was the 17th largest company in the world. So it was legitimate. So I applied. I did not tell my parents. Over the next 1 month, a variety of different things happened.
Okay.
So I went for my interviews. I talked to my parents. They were not happy, and then they were okay about it. They always supported me, though. I got a chance to join, but then they wanted me to join before I finished my first year exams, which I did not want to do. And so they took away the offer. And finally, they made the offer again after I finished my first year studies. And I took up the offer. Now, that was a very, very bold choice. And I still don't know how.
You would have had to give up your studies then.
I did
have
to. I gave up my medical studies, which hadn't happened in the history of medical school, that somebody would leave a prestigious
voluntarily, not because you were kicked out.
No, and after doing pretty well in the first year exams, because I love the study part of it, I love the profession, I just did not translate that into a life that I wanted to have.
Sure.
And that wasn't because that's how it should be, but just the people that I met did not represent who I wanted to be. In my life, I've met a lot of doctors who've had a very interesting sort of a career which I would have loved, but I just did not have that vision back then. So I think it was more the lack of vision and lack of exposure than the reality. But I made the choice. I made the choice to leave medicine and
at 18, basically.
At 18, and do something which I did not know anything about. So I flew off to the United States to work with Chevron, and I started working full-time. And I started studying part-time, which is very, very different from what I imagined out of my life or my parents imagined out of my life.
Because normally it would be the other way around.
It would be the other way around.
You'd be studying full-time, and then if you have some time to earn some money on the side, you would do a job.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So it was great. I learned on the job. It was a traineeship, and loved traveling around the world. The exposure
What kind of things were you doing on the ships?
So Chevron is an oil company.
Yeah.
So I was working on oil tankers as a navigating officer. So I was learning how to navigate ships. I was learning how to pump in cargo, pump out cargo, which is a little bit more scientific than just that. I was learning a lot of skills of working within very multinational organizations, because on a ship you have 20 people, but from 7, 8, 9 countries. Yeah. And everybody is accountable for something, because there are so few people that if you're given something, you do it. And then very early on, I realized the responsibility was extremely important, but when you're accountable for something, you just have to do it. And I think that learning was immense. I was also studying from a very good university, and that went very well, but it took me 6 years, or the plan was to finish the studies over a 6-year period instead of a 4-year period, just because you're working full-time. So it was a very different kind of a life between the ages of 18 to 24, but I'm very glad that I made that choice. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't climbed the mountains. It's kind of all linked.
Right.
But I'm glad that I made that choice.
And you never felt that you kind of missed out on the university experience, the proper, being full-time in a campus and everything that goes with it. Did you ever feel some sort of regret looking back?
So I had 1 year of it. Okay. So it wasn't that I did not experience it at all. I must say I did not miss it back then. But I think many years later in my life, when I was 31, again made a very strange choice to go back to school full-time and do my MBA. Mm-hmm. And again, the logical thing at that point in time, because I had a great job, a great career path ahead of me. My wife was working full-time, and we were living in Kenya at that point in time. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to do a full-time MBA, and we moved to London to do that. Wow. So I kind of got it a little bit back, but thankfully with my wife and 2 kids, which was a very different experience. But no, I did not, at that point in time, I did not feel that I missed out. Yeah. But if I hadn't had that 1 year, I think I would have. Maybe you've had,
or rather not missing out, or just kind of the feeling of, what would life have been like.
Indeed.
But you had a taste of it. Yeah. And so you mentioned that, travel is a big thing for you. And that's, I rejoin you in my love of travel, not for travel's sake, but I've always been a big believer about the fact that we have such a beautiful, immense planet with so many different cultures. And I think one of the best way to learn is through travel. And we try to encourage that with our kids as well. A lot of people thought I was crazy for doing the Inca Trail when I was 5 months pregnant with my first child. And then we did the equivalent in Mexico in my second pregnancy. But I just love the fact that you get to meet all these different people, different cultures, just embrace all that. How does your love of travel impact how you are as a professional and as a leader?
I think, as you said, travel is a great teacher, right? I think the fact that you're able to experience so many cultures, meet so many people, be in very diverse sorts of environment opens your mind up, and you learn a lot from others and everything that you see around you. And that translates into who you are as a person, because you are a lot more open-minded than if you did not travel. And I think as a business person, I think that's really important because it allows you to work internationally, which is becoming a reality in today's world. You can work with different people, you can work across generations, you can work in different locations, and you can always, think about different perspectives when you're looking at solutions that you want to implement.
Yes.
Right? So it's very enriching in that perspective. Now, let me take one at a time. I think in our personal lives, our whole family loves to travel. I think we've all traveled a lot. Every time we have any free time, we out exploring a new country. I think that's the only weakness, only hobby that we had, even when we didn't have much money as young professionals. So we always saved for travel, and I think I'm very glad we did that. And I think today, if you speak to our kids, even they would say that this whole idea of traveling to new places enriches them. So we all look forward to our annual explorations, if I may. I think on my professional side, I think one of the things that I've always done is it has allowed me to make choices accordingly. So if I had a choice between two roles, one which would allow me to travel and experience different cultures and also be in a more international setting, I would always choose that versus something else which may pay me more, which may be better in terms of grade, but I would not choose to do that. So it allowed me to say no to a lot of things and say yes to a lot of things. So it was always very clear in my mind, how I would make those choices. And I think that has played a big role in helping me build a career, which has taken me to so many different parts of the world, and now today bringing me to Mauritius as well.
But one thing that intrigues me, and it always intrigues me whenever I meet expats in Mauritius, is that although we're relatively well known in Europe as a holiday destination, to the kind of more, if you look at financial services or more complex industries, when you mention Mauritius, sometimes you'll just get a blank face. So what brought you here? Coming from Denmark, the US, India, what brought you to Mauritius?
Well, when I reflect back on my life, right, I think this, the debate is always whether it's strategy or serendipity. And I think this serendipity plays such a big role in one's life that we must give it a chance.
Sure.
So I was this was 2012, 2013, when I was living in Kenya. I was working with a Danish company called Maersk. And at that point in time, in January 2013, Philippe Espitali-Noël, who is the CEO of Rogers, he decided to make a trip to Kenya.
Okay.
And through, again, sheer coincidence, one of my colleagues introduced me to him. And the only thing I knew about Mauritius was that it was a great holiday destination, but nothing beyond that. But when I met up with Philippe many years back, I started understanding the whole ecosystem in Mauritius that I simply did not know about, the whole professional landscape, the different industries that existed over here. And after spending about 2 days with him, trying to figure out a way for Rogers to enter the East Africa market, I was quite intrigued by Mauritius. So within the next few months, I made a trip to Mauritius, and I was quite impressed by the level of infrastructure over here, and something that I'd never heard of. And my only exposure, very strange, and we can come back to that, but my only exposure to Mauritius before that was to meet a lot of Mauritian colleagues at Maersk. But one thing that they all said was that they were so happy to work with an international company, and they did not want to go back to Mauritius. So it was a very strange kind of an experience that I had before meeting Philippe and then coming over here in person.
So you already you had a preconception in your mind.
I
it
did.
Must be a very,
small,
yeah.
exactly place. And when I came over here, I thought it was beautiful and it was nice. And after that, I moved to London. We decided not to work together immediately. But in 2015, I started working with Rogers, helping them build the Africa footprint.
Right.
And when I did that, it allowed me to come to Mauritius many a time. So since 2015, I've been a regular visitor of Mauritius. But despite that, moving to Mauritius did not come naturally, and it was a very complicated choice for my family and me.
So you were in London, you were in Kenya or in London by then in 2015?
2015, we moved back to Kenya to help build up the foothold of Rogers in Africa.
But based in Kenya, yeah.
Based in Kenya. Spending a lot of time in Mauritius, but based in Kenya. In 2018, 2019, our kids were growing up. They were 10 and 12. We knew that we'd been moving around with them for quite some time. We knew that they wanted some stability in one school after changing between 5 and 7 schools between both of them by the ages of 10 and 12. So we knew that we wanted to call a place home. Now, my choice was to go to Denmark. I spoke the language, felt very comfortable over there. My wife also enjoyed her time in Denmark, but she did not enjoy the weather and also the fact that as a dentist, her practice was very limited over there.
Right.
So as a family, we were kind of torn which one to choose, and it wasn't an easy choice, I must say. For 1 year, almost every dinner conversation was which of the two will we choose.
Yeah.
And in our family, from the very beginning, all of us have a voice, including the children. My wife has 4 votes, and all 3 of us have 1 vote each.
She has the veto.
She has a veto. No, I don't think that's true. I think it was a fair discussion. It was a fair discussion.
Fair enough.
And the whole reasoning was that let's experiment. Let's come to Mauritius. We don't know much about it. Because, one of the things about Mauritius is that when you come here as a visitor, it doesn't really open up to you because, the beaches are great, the hotels are great. You can find that in so many places. But the richness of Mauritius is in the people. It's in the diversity of cultures. It's in the diversity of thoughts. That's where Mauritius is more interesting in a very small geography than any other place. That's where the small size is an advantage and not a constraint, because you have so many diverse people with diverse thoughts and diverse cultures that are present in such a small piece of land. So you come across them very quickly and very intensely. So that's a big advantage of Mauritius, but you don't get to experience this when you are a visitor. It takes a lot of time to open up.
Sure.
So in 2012, we said, okay, let's make a choice. Let's move to Mauritius. We were not sure if my wife would get a dental license to practice as a dentist. I wasn't sure how I would fit in, living in a small island. And if things don't work out, we'll do our best, because once you make a choice to do something, you got to do your best.
Commit to it.
You have to commit to it. But for some reason, it doesn't work out. We can always move to Denmark within a year. So in 2019, we moved here with a lot of uncertainty. And the funny thing is, we didn't even know about the biggest uncertainty that was yet to come, which is COVID. So we moved here. I think it was interesting. I think the most interesting choice of all was the choice that our kids made. So they've always been in international British schools. The English was their first language and is their first language still. But for some reason, when they went to École de Soins in Mocha, we decided to live in Mocha because of the weather, because of the just a nice place, convenience, and it's just structured, right?
Yeah.
So they saw one of the English schools, not in Mocha, somewhere else, because we wanted to keep, because of the flexibility, we wanted to keep the September to June year, and then when you want to make a choice, you must have at least more than one choices. So, one of my friends suggested that why don't you go and see the French school? And we thought it was a terrible idea. And when
presumably they didn't speak any French then.
They didn't speak any French then. So they went to the school. They came back. This was just before we moved to Mauritius. And they said, we really, really liked the environment that was there.
It's amazing.
So because the whole family is experimenting, we want to experiment too. That seemed very strange, but it was a very logical choice to make, now that we think about it.
And also, if I may make a comment on that, if you hadn't been travelers, maybe they wouldn't have made that choice. If they'd grown up in India or Kenya and spent their whole life there, only being exposed to one type of schooling, albeit, yes, they had only gone to British schools, but because they were already open-minded and they already had this openness towards the world, they were open to trying a new system.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that traveling and also moving as expatriates teach you, because you can make a big shift and adjust to it fast. So the whole thinking was that if it doesn't work out after 1 year, they still have a choice to go back to the English school. Like nothing's stopping them. However, if they don't make that choice to try something new out, they would never learn anything new. So it was a very interesting choice that they made.
And again, both of them were aligned. Both of them liked it. And
both of them were aligned. And I think that helped a lot. Because if one wasn't, I think it would have been more difficult. So both of them committed to it. So when we moved to Mauritius, we said 1 year, we commit fully to it. We will not live as expatriates. We will live as Mauritians. We will have friends who are Mauritians. We will be in a place which is Mauritian. We will become Mauritian from day one. And if that doesn't work out for us for some reason, at least we know that we've given it our best shot. I think that was the thinking.
And then COVID hit.
And then COVID hit. So COVID hit, everything closed down. That we did not plan for at all. However, when COVID hit, looking back, and it wasn't a good period for many nations, many industries, many people, but for us as a family, I think it worked out very well. Before COVID, we were all in our own lives and I was traveling a lot. It allowed us to be in one place. Getting the dental license was a little bit complicated, but we managed to get that through just having an honest conversation. So that worked out. But most importantly, during COVID, everybody was stuck in Mauritius. So this whole thing that I talked about being a small piece of land with so much intellect, so much energy, so much cultural diversity, everybody was in Mauritius for the first time. And for us as outsiders, it allowed us for the first time to make real friendships, real relationships with people. And nothing has ever come close to that. So the next 2 years when everybody was stuck on the island, it was just such a golden period for us to actually make real relationships, become even more Mauritians, and completely feel at home. And I think that really helped us settle in Mauritius, for all of us, all four of us. And I think that
and
was
as
the,
you
that
said,
was the
that
beauty of it.
sometimes it's a deliberate choice, sometimes it's just serendipity, and it just maybe, who knows, if COVID hadn't hit, maybe you wouldn't have adapted as well, or you would have committed, but you wouldn't have seen that other side of
Totally.
us that you did. Yeah.
No, absolutely, because it takes a bit of time. I think, as I've said before, Mauritius is extremely complex. It's very small. It's
You compared
very
it to an onion, I believe, in
yes,
another
exactly.
interview.
And there's so many layers and there's
Yeah.
so much nuance to it. But I think it's an immense privilege to be treated as a Mauritian, be seen as a Mauritian, yet be an outsider, because it gives you both the perspectives. But I'm very glad we're here. Very, very glad we're here. And this is home for us now.
That's amazing.
So-
It's lovely to hear that, and lovely to hear you live in Mecca, which I love being in the center of the island, because I remember when we moved back to Mauritius 11 years ago, I said to my husband, I've been commuting in London for the past 13 years. I don't want to commute again. I would love to be by the beach, but I just love being, door to door, 10 minutes. I want to move on to another topic, which is sustainability. I know you don't head the function anymore, but you're someone that's always been passionate about sustainability. We had recently the head of sustainability from MCB on the podcast, and she's very passionate about it. I know you work for a group that has it as one of its top priorities on its agenda and is very involved in driving the sustainability priorities. One of the aspects of sustainability that's always intrigued me, or rather, I'm trying to understand the dynamics, is particularly in Mauritius, being a small country, what role do you think, or how important role should the private sector play in driving the sustainability agenda, as opposed to merely being passive actors just waiting to implement a policy set by government?
So first of all, sustainability is extremely, extremely important. I think we're seeing how hot the days are getting. We're seeing the erratic climatic conditions. So the climate change is real. But as I've said before, it's not the change of climate, but it's the pace of change of the climate that is dangerous right now. Because the ice caps have been melting for 10,000 years. But the pace at which it is happening today is a challenge. There are two things that I would say about sustainability. The first one is sustainability must be sustainable. So it is completely unreasonable to ask companies to balance profit, people, and the planet. Because what happens in that particular case is that if you ask companies to find their own balance, and the companies focus on people and the planet at the cost of profit, then you let the bad actors win, right, and the good actors suffer. And that's not sustainable. So at some point that's going to give in, and people will talk about it, but making real change is going to be very complicated. So there has to be an alignment that if you do the right thing, then you must be winning in the marketplace. And the way most people measure the winning, even today, is through the profits you make. So it's really important to create business models that are right for the environment, right for the people, but also right for the profits. So that's what I mean by making sustainability sustainable. And I think the second one is that sustainability has to be made part of our personal lives. And I remember speaking at one of the sustainability conferences a couple of years back, and there was a big window, and when we looked outside, there were 1,500 cars. There were 1,500 people and there were 1,500 cars. So, having moved from Denmark, where people live sustainability on a daily basis, We don't. So again, it's uncool to be sustainable in our private lives in Mauritius today, and that needs to change. And only then the business model will evolve, because then you and I will care about sustainability, and the businesses will have to care about it, because those are our personal preferences. And both these things, I believe, have a long way to go in Mauritius. And I think the private sector must play a role to actually work together at building a set of rules that will help align doing right versus winning in the marketplace. And I don't think that's the case today. I think we have a lot of great initiatives going on, but till the time market is demanding it, real change is not being made. So you'll see a lot of sustainability in hotels, because a lot of customers who actually come to Mauritius as tourists demand that.
Yes,
And
they would choose their hotel depending on
exactly. So when we do that, we have people actually following sustainability. When you have good plans in place to put solar energy onto your roofs, companies are doing that. So I think companies in Mauritius are extremely good, extremely competitive. So the moment being sustainable equals making more profit, I think everybody would align to that. And I think we need to give that a little bit more thought. And I think that's where the private sector and to some extent the public sector must work together to change the set of rules. Now, whatever we do in Mauritius, one of the things that we hear all the time is whatever we do in Mauritius has no impact on the world, because we're just so small and so tiny in the bigger scheme of things. And again, the role of Mauritius more and more has to be a platform, has to be a lab, has to be a place where people experiment. And I think a huge opportunity that we have is to convert Mauritius into that lab, even for sustainability, for new things to be tried out, new business models to be tried out. And that can then be implemented in other islands, other parts of the world. And that's how we can have an impact even beyond our borders. But that's something that we are not doing a lot of. The third point and the last point is we only look at the land when we look at sustainability. We have one of the largest areas of water that we also have under Mauritius.
And we've been hearing about the blue economy for years. In the every year's budget speech, we talk about it, but we don't really do much.
do much about it. And that's again a huge missed opportunity. So I think we need to, and I don't think we have all the intellect, all the ideas, all the people that we need to solve this problem. And hence, getting the right set of minds and creating the right platform in Mauritius could be very interesting. And then we can have an impact on the world, which we have had in the past.
But that's the other concern that when I just launched the video podcast a couple of years ago, we had a series on leadership. And every single guest, we talked about the infamous brain drain. And I think, maybe it's just my perception, I think it's slightly slowed down now. I think post-COVID, we saw a huge exodus. But I think one of the main concerns is also about our human resources. I heard you say in an interview, it's not a bad thing per se that the net population is decreasing, but we should focus on the quality as well of the human resources. Is it a concern to you that there is this issue of lack of it is an employees market? There are more jobs than there are employees. You go out, 30 years ago, you'd go out to supermarkets or restaurants or even hotels, it would be Mauritians. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we are opening up more to the world. But my concern is that a lot of Mauritians are still going, but they're not coming back.
Sure. No, I think it's a real concern. So about a month back, my younger daughter was off for the night for a friend's birthday. And I had the job of going to pick her up and bring many of her friends back. Okay. So there were 5 of them. Okay. And I was driving from the east back to Mocha, and I was having a conversation with them. It was very awkward, all teenagers. So trying to talk about Taylor Swift and how it is.
Anything that's trendy.
Anything that is trendy. And, all of them are 1 year before the final year. And, they're obviously thinking about what the next steps are. And just started asking them, so what they wanted to do next. And towards the end, I said, how many of you see yourself coming back to Mauritius? And these are kids who have had great education. They come from great families.
They're Mauritians.
The Mauritians, all of them, except Nitya. And, they live the best of Mauritian lives. And all of them, barring none, said, we want to stay abroad. We will go out to study and we will stay there. And I'm worried about this trend, right? I think many of them would come back, but the fact that they don't start their journey wanting to come back, I think it's a problem. Right?
Do you think it's a pull factor or push factor, or a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's just something that they hear all the time, that there are many more opportunities outside, that you should live abroad for a few years before you come back, if at all. They see the lack of opportunities. Unfortunately, when we pick up the newspapers, it doesn't talk about a lot of great things that are happening in the country. It talks more about the first page is always about the scandals, and that's wrong. So it's kind of, what you see all the time is also not that positive, though a lot of positive things have been and are happening. You just don't get to see that all the time, right? And I think that's a problem. So that, coupled with the fact that I might be getting my numbers wrong, but at its peak, Mauritius had about 30,000 kids being born every year. And today we have less than 10,000.
Wow.
And that's a problem, right? So we just have few people coming into the workforce, and out of that, many more are choosing to go abroad and stay abroad. And I think that's a problem. And I think Mauritius has to make a set of choices. It has to make a choice whether it wants to be a country where the population is decreasing and then adapt accordingly, or does it want to be a country where a lot of foreigners are welcome and we grow the population like Singapore did, or Dubai did in a controlled way, or become a country of older retired people as such and welcome all of the people who've finished working and bring their assets and their lives over here and then cater to them.
So what we call the silver
economy. There are many choices, and all of them are right and all of them have certain shortcomings.
Sure.
But I think a conscious conversation about the different choices and making that choice as a society is really important. And I don't think that's happening in a very structured manner. And that's a dialogue that must happen, because otherwise the population will decrease. We're not going to grow our per capita GDP. The wants of the population will increase, but we will just not have enough people to satisfy that. And that's what we see right now, because the populations are getting richer. Everybody expects more services, but then there are few people to deliver those services.
Yes.
And that's where the mismatch is happening. And that needs to be corrected. A conversation needs to happen.
And we are, I mean, when we look at our history, as you rightly said previous in another forum, we're a fairly new country. When we look at our history compared to Europe, we're a fairly new country. But I always, and perhaps that's unfair on me, I always compare ourselves to Singapore in terms of when we obtained our independence. And I say it's unfair because we've had our own success story. We've moved from a monocrop culture to, such a diversified economy. But it's almost like we've plateaued a little bit, and we now need to go to the next level of innovation. I know innovation is a broad term, but I don't know, in the last, I would say 5 or 10 years, I got the impression that we tend to follow what sounds trendy. Crypto sounds trendy, AI sounds trendy, and these are all, in themselves, perhaps not bad things to focus on. But if we take a step back, is there a vision? Is there a vision like Lee Kuan Yew had a vision? So in terms of innovation, what do you think? Do you have a magic formula that you're willing to share for free on the podcast?
I think there is no magic formula, right? It's hard work. And I think let's maybe take a step back and let's kind of build the comparison to Singapore in a different manner, right? So I think when Mauritius and Singapore became independent around the same time, the populations were kind of similar. The per capita GDP was kind of similar. Both the countries had very, very small markets.
Yes.
So you can innovate. Innovation is expensive. So when you innovate, you expect a return on innovation. When you have small local markets, you can't innovate that much. So you probably have to innovate around being a platform rather than being a market. And I think Singapore and Mauritius took very different journeys. As we worked very hard to educate our populations, build new industries, and so on, Singapore worked very hard at becoming the platform of choice for the world. We did that in some cases, like the financial services, much later than many others. But for the others, the textile economy, the whole tourism, we were not a platform. We were simply a market, right? We were simply a place where people would come and spend. And Singapore did everything as a platform. So I think that was a very different set of choices that both the countries made. And I think that fundamentally changed the paths that each of the country took. Singapore now has over 6 million people with a per capita GDP of over $100,000. That creates a market of $600 odd billion. Whereas for us, we're still a market of $12 billion. So coming back to your question on innovation, I think if you think about industries where the local market exists, for example, retail. So what happened before Bagatelle, for example, the whole retail market was unsophisticated.
Yes.
And because the population was growing, the population had more disposable income, there was a local market, there was a lot of innovation that happened. And today if you go, and your whole retail experience is completely different. So there has been innovation where there has been a local market. But I don't know why this whole fundamental choice of seeing ourselves as a local market which can only grow at a certain pace is limiting the way we think about the future. Whereas for Singapore, they went through the whole platform journey, and now they're still a platform, but then they have a significant local market as well. So no, I don't have a magic formula, but I think there are a few ingredients that are important. I think the first thing is that companies and people have to be very bold at taking bold decisions. And they can take these bold decisions if they feel that they have a chance to win and they have a chance to recover some of that investment, right? So we need to figure out how Mauritius presents itself. I think the second bit is there has to be a lot more collaboration. And I think that's a very big challenge, where one of the strangest things that I find over here compared to a Denmark or a Singapore is that while there's a lot of competition, at the industry level, there's a lot of collaboration as well.
Yes.
And for innovation to happen, you have to bring in three different entities together. You have to bring in the private sector with all the collaboration it can come with, the academic institutions, and we have a few of them which are very good, and also the government for regulation. And they have to work seamlessly so that innovation can happen fast. Because right now you could end up in a situation where the company that I work with might have a great idea, which has a great potential. However, we don't have people over here who are capable of actually doing that right, because we haven't talked to the academic teams about it. And then if we have the people and the ideas, the regulation does not support it. And one of the things that Denmark did very well, and still does very well, is for the core industries, they bring all of them together. So the pace of change is very high, and also the cost of innovation is brought lower. And I think we need to do more of that. And I think we did that in the past, when the whole telecoms industry came in. Yeah. These things moved very fast when MTEL came into the country. But now I believe we've become comfortable. We are more afraid of losing what we have than to be aspirational around where we want to be. And I think that needs to change. That hunger needs to come in again. That whole vision of driving Mauritius to the next level needs to come back again.
Do you see that hunger? And that was going to be my last question, which kind of rejoins the first question about childhood. Do you see that hunger in the youth today? I mean, I know we talked about young adults wanting to leave, but in terms of the infamous Generation Z or the newest one, Generation Alpha, do you see, because they have a different way of seeing the world, which I think in a way is fascinating. They look at the world in a very different way to what we did look at the world when we were growing up. Do you see that, I would say, that hunger for purpose in them? And do you think that can help with the innovation agenda?
I think it's difficult to generalize, but I'll make an attempt. I spend a lot of time working in Africa, in the United States, and also in Mauritius. And what I find is that there are few people over here with a lot of hunger, but in general, I find a lot more comfort. I find a lot more happiness, which is a good thing, with where things are today, and not wanting to change that too much. I still remember I was working on a project in the United States last year, and we were going to work with a company, and the team came with about 6 people pitching for the work.
Okay.
And when they were talking to us, in the end, they said, you know what, we're just letting you know, but if you work with us, you can call us anytime. If something is urgent, and if you figure that out at 2 o'clock in the night because you're in a different time zone, our teams will get up and finish it by 6 in the morning. And honestly, when I worked with them on the project for about 8 months, we did not do it very often, but when it was crunch time and we had to do it,
they delivered.
I think in Mauritius, we can find a lot of companies who would do that, but I've never had anybody who has taken the step to actually sell that and tell us that this is what we stand for. And I'm for the work-life balance, right? I think it's really, really important. But in some cases, Mauritius is not alone. We compete in the world. And if we have to, have a better life than everybody else, which we are all expecting, we want better wages, we want better quality of life, then working hard from time to time has to be a part of that. And I think I don't see it as much as I would like to over here.
I agree. And I think it forms part of a wider debate as to, I think for a very long time, and I always link it to some extent, and I don't mean it in a negative way, our sort of post-colonial legacy where we went from being dirt poor, let's call a spade around the time of independence, to, as you said, achieving a certain level of comfort. And I often feel that parents now who are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s feel, I don't want my children to go through what we went through, so I'll give them a better life. But it shouldn't be giving them a better life at the cost of complacency and mediocrity. I think we shouldn't be afraid to have conversations about, we had a business leader last week, and I was telling her how one of the things I struggled when I came here is that, I felt afraid to say that I don't like mediocrity because, you don't want to come across as being a slave driver. But at the same time, I think we should expect high standards.
Yeah.
But yes, bearing in mind having a healthy workplace and work-life balance and all of these sustainable practices. But yeah, we should aspire to always be better. Yeah.
And Mauritius has all the ingredients, right? Like it has the intellect, it has the cultural diversity. We can relate to people from all over the world. We have the education. We have the global relationships, the diplomatic relationships. We have access to capital over here. So we have all the ingredients that it takes to actually win much more than we do today. But I think committing to a goal is really important. Having the conviction in what you're doing and what you believe in, and then driving it with full force is extremely important. Being okay with failing is also very important. And also celebrating success is very important, right? I think, I kind of take example of one of the businesses, and I was talking to the CEO who actually exited the business. It was financially very rewarding for him. And, I said, why don't you share it with more people? And he said, it's just not acceptable. You can't stand out from the crowd. So 99% people in Mauritius would never hear about him just because it's not okay to talk about stories where you have wild successes. And I think that's also a bit of a problem.
Yes,
and that I can't understand, because when we drive cars, it's okay to kind of compete onto which cars you're driving.
Yes, so exactly.
Some cases it's okay, some cases it's not okay.
Yeah.
So it's a very special place.
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of being in Mauritius, because you could stay here for 30, 40 years and you can still continue
peeling the onion
and learning new things, right?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And what's quite funny is that, if I may say so, you're the second or the third person that I've interviewed from the group where you're from. And you all have very similar ways of not thinking necessarily, but you're driven by the same mindset of a growth mindset. And I think that's truly wonderful. I don't know whether it's the companies that attracts that kind of individuals, or it's the company that shapes those individuals. Maybe it's a bit of both.
It's a bit of both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.